You can have if you want.
No! I don't know if that was right.
It sounded right to me. And we are back. We are talking about our favorite TV dads as we get ready to celebrate Father's Day here in the U.S. And last we left, we were just about to talk about Homer Simpson and a dad that, by all accounts, is far from perfect. He's often clueless, impulsive, and makes plenty of mistakes, but his heart's in the right place, and his love for his family finds a way to shine through, despite how many times he will strangle Bart. He's an enjoyable character, and I don't think he has as many confrontations with Lisa and or Maggie, but I think, he shows his true love for Bart in different ways than maybe he does for his other two children.
I think with The Simpsons, you have a very outwardly buffoon dad, and watching how the show navigates the show, it's called The Simpsons, all the elements of the family unit are there, but Homer gets to be kind of his own person in more of a way, I think, for many of the episodes than some of these others, I guess, or more episodes can focus on what his adult life and his job is. I think there's varying degrees of that through some of these TV dads, but as a result, being this sort of male figurehead of the family and being deliberately or otherwise just obtuse about it, kind of shows the different ways in which Homer has failed his family, but then also is, again, as you say, Micah, redemptive.
I was just going to say really quickly that I think that, I think we needed a goofy dad kind of archetype, and because a lot of times with animated shows, the dads are the archetypes are even more to whatever extreme they're leaning towards. I think that's a good Homer is a good example of that. I think the other one that sticks out to me is Peter Griffin from Family Guy too. So it's not necessarily they're bad dads. It's just that they're not getting it right all the time, and maybe the role that they serve for society is to show other dads that hey, could be worse.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I keep in regards to Peter Griffin, I'm what harebrained scheme will he drag the family along to next? And with Homer, there's some element of that, but it's less. I think Peter is deliberately more self-serving more often than Homer.
Yeah.
When Homer takes the family somewhere on a whim, it's less. It's less self-serving. It's for his heart is more in the right place, I think, even. But both dads bring a lot of joy. I think both dads relish their role. Both dads like being dads, which I think is
just some kids give them more of a run for their money. Yeah,
let's say it's down to the kids and whether they need strangling or.
There's certainly some stereotypes that we can call out with Homer in terms of, he likes his beer.
Mm-hmm.
He likes to burp. He likes, he's got this blue collar job at the plant, right? And he's a family man. He's raising a family of 3, and he's trying to make it in the burbs.
Yeah, he's a wife guy, I think you could say too. Loves his wife.
Yeah,
I think
loves
that
Maggie.
There's something that can be said too for how
Marge.
The difference between his relationship with Lisa and Maggie versus Bart, like you were saying, not necessarily just because Bart gets in trouble the most, but I think that in general, there is that stereotype of daddy's girl versus rambunctious young son.
Yeah.
So.
And there's this deliberate posturing of the son has to follow in the dad's footsteps, so the son has to be just like the dad.
Mm-hmm.
And so when there's not, that can be a source of tension.
While we're on the topic of goofballs, let's talk about Al Bundy, because I think there's a lot of similarities here between him and Homer Simpson. And Married with Children was a great sitcom, and Ed O'Neill in the star role. I know probably folks today know him more likely from Modern Family, right?
Mm-hmm.
But before he was on Modern Family, he was married with children, and Al is grumpy, he's sarcastic, he's bitter about life, and I think through him, a lot of people saw the struggles of everyday family life, right? He would come home, he would plotz on the couch, he would ask Peggy for a beer, and he would put his hand down his pants, turn on the tube, and tune out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think that was kind of the stereotypical working
the blue-collar
man
dad. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or at least that's what
in
TV
like the
wanted
80s.
you to believe. Yeah. I don't think I ever realized how much Al Bundy and Homer Simpson have in common
Me
until you
neither.
stripped it down
Yeah.
that way.
Yeah, wow.
But you're right. I think that's like, that's the aspiration.
There's a
is you're
live
either-
action Homer Simpson and it's Al
you're either
Bundy.
going from your blue-collar job to the corner bar down the street to have a couple beers with the other blue-collar workers, or you just want to go home and plop down on the couch after a long day at the factory or wherever else you're working, you know?
For sure. Yeah, and and there were also just these moments where he would react to what women might be wearing, or and he very much loved his daughter.
Mm-hmm.
I can't recall offhand like how strong a relationship he had with his son, but I always remember him calling his daughter Pumpkin. So there was that affection there.
I think that goes back to like similar like dynamic differences that The Simpsons does differently, because like Lisa, as the oldest daughter, for example, she just doesn't need very much, right? So that he can, like Homer was able to like dote on her a little bit more. And I think that there's like a similar situation happening with Al and Married with Children. Not necessarily that like the daughter wasn't getting up to her own little like hijinks too, but just like the stereotype of like, oh, that's daddy's girl, so he's not going to come down as hard on her.
Right.
And the punishment,
she could get away.
like and then the son does like one little thing and it's like the world's over, and all of a sudden he's like disciplinary dad.
Yeah, and daughter was played by Christina Applegate.
Yeah. Great role for her too.
I think too with Al, you have these elements of like, he had a football career, he had former glories that he keeps
That's
kind of
right.
harking back to, and an identity before fatherhood that is explored or nostalgic to him. And I think he keeps a car that he cares a lot about. I think it's a Dodge, and just kind of again, more stereotypes, but more, these are what was a reflection of society's perception of what adult men with kids that were married with kids liked, and what their passions or their hobbies were. It was really interesting.
Yeah, and how things change once you have kids, to your point of like the glory days being over in a way. I think that like, because he's a character that's allowed to be bitter, like he can be a little bit resentful, but like not fully resentful in a way that makes him seem hateful or neglectful of his family.
And he was always happy to get some. That was something that was in many an episode.
Mm-hmm.
If the opportunity presented itself. So, all right. Well, on that note, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about Carl Winslow. I loved Family Matters growing up. It was such a great show.
That TGIF lineup.
I know. I feel like that's what's really hitting home here, is that TGIF lineup. And Carl was the rock of his family. He was a steady, reliable figure who kept everything running as smoothly as he could. He was a police officer in the Chicago Police Department, and he worked really hard to provide and protect his family. And we know who the aggravating neighbor next door was each and every episode. Good old Steve Urkel. But even there,
like, father figure to him too.
As well,
I think that, it's very clear that Steve wormed his way into the family, right? Like the show does not hide that fact, but the fact is that like for Steve, like Carl was like the dad he chose basically, and then Carl begrudgingly fills that role more and more as the show progresses. So
Yeah, and it's interesting to see Steve Urkel and Stefan Urkel, right? The fact that he almost needs to change his identity in a way to be accepted by certain members of the Winslow family.
mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point too. I think that this like speaking of like other members, I think that it's like when you have like that larger family dynamic, you get to see how like these parental figures interact differently with all the different like variations of children that exist in these universes, and I think that also kind of helps the character shine. So even if you're talking about like Steve's alter ego, or like the like the difference between how he treats like his son and his daughter, like the youngest versus the oldest, like it all kind of comes into play in something like A Family Matters with an ensemble cast.
And his mother, Estelle, always kept him in check too.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think is that it's not necessarily a stereotype, but it's a theme I think you often see when you have the grandmother in these shows. They're usually there to make sure that their son is seeing the light, right, in situations that maybe they otherwise wouldn't. And I think that comes through a lot with Steve Urkel too, where she's advocating on his behalf.
And it's taking, it takes that additional point of view. Like for a dad to consider an outside point of view is a really rewarding character for anybody to take an outside point of view pointed by like said in love to somebody, and then consider it and change your opinion like that. We could use more of that. Let's all do that. That's a great value that Carl Winslow had.
For sure. Well, we're going to bring it all home here with Tim the Toolman Taylor, a favorite, I think, of many growing up on the show Home Improvement. And Tim was very involved in his kids' lives. He helped them out with countless projects. He attended their events. He was always trying to be there for them, even if his methods were sometimes considered to be over the top. And, his comedic mishaps, especially on his show Tool Time, made him hilarious and relatable as a dad who just doesn't always get it right, but he tries his best.
He's definitely the TV dad I probably spent the most hours watching. And there was just always something, again, crazy going on or crazy going wrong. And I think that the balance between him and his wife and him and his kids and trying to do the right thing and then just having sort of chaos caused by his life circumstances made the show very entertaining for a very long time.
Yeah, I think a good example of how like sometimes just like showing up and being passionate is the most important thing. Like, even
right?
If, you bungle it all up, it's better than not being there at all. And I think that what's really interesting about all these dads is that they clearly all have like, very involved careers, Tim is on air. It takes a lot of time to produce a show. Probably in like the real world, somebody who made a living the way he did wouldn't even have enough time to like really be at home and like spend time with his family. But like these shows always made it possible to showcase that there was a way to strike a balance between work and having a family and being an involved parent. And you see that too with Danny, who's also a broadcast personality, going back to the beginning of this episode with Danny Tanner, that he has a broadcast career, but he's still there for his kids.
That's such an interesting point. Yeah, that they're able to work their career around it. Because I'm thinking of all the TV dads that don't show up as often, the Don Drapers and the the other characters, and it really, in stark contrast, really shows what value these men brought their families.
Yes. Yeah. And like that they choose to spend time with their family. like,
but
when
they're happy.
when
They're
there's free
glad they
time.
have
Yeah.
kids. Which why does
Yeah,
anybody have kids and not
exactly.
want to raise
Yeah.
them, want to spend time with them? So I think TV has gotten. Yes, there were through the many time periods and eras, dads who did not do that. But again, speaking to the era in which we grew up in, it was nice to see so many role models to choose from of dads that were just positive male examples in pop culture of what a dad could be.
Definitely. Well, we're going to pivot and talk about some of our favorite movie dads. But before we do that, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back.